Chapter 17. The first annual Christmas gala for the celebration of magical unity. So, Harry began, as Leo Clifton led Hermione into the back room. Draco nearly jumped at the sight. He had been watching Hermione smile at Clifton, engaging in polite conversation, the way her profile caught the bright studio lights. Now he turned to Potter, who was leaning casually against a display of brushes and powders. "So what?" Draco replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Potter raised his eyebrows. "So, you two have made up, have you?" Draco averted his gaze, feeling warmth creep into his cheeks as he stared at a poster of a giant alligator. "I suppose you noticed she was speaking to me in full sentences again. That Seeker's Eye doesn't miss a thing, does it?" "I noticed more than that," Potter muttered. Draco cast a mortified glance at Potter, who now looked a bit flushed himself. Why had he brought it up if it was only going to embarrass them both? For Merlin's sake. Of course, Draco thought, it would have been hard to miss the way he and Hermione had looked at breakfast. She had walked in to find him attempting to make breakfast before Harry had woken up. 15 minutes later, everything had been mysteriously burnt. "I can't take anything you say seriously," Draco remarked. "When you look like that." "Oh, like you look any better?" Potter shot back. In unison, they glanced into the mirror behind the counter and snorted. Draco wouldn't have recognized himself if he'd seen that face in a picture. In the end, Clifton had opted for a wig rather than dye to achieve the proper texture. A wild nest of black curls, reminiscent of a thunderstorm, which matched the facial hair glued to the lower half of his face. Using cold, slimy putty and rubber fixtures, Clifton had given Draco a snub nose and fuller cheeks, then swabbed his eyebrows with black paint. "You look like a sea captain," Potter chortled. "And you look like a Viking," Draco shot back, smirking. Potter's shiny bald head glinted in the studio lights, and the atmosphere buzzed with an air of anticipation as they prepared for the gala. Clifton had transformed their appearances significantly. He had aged Potter to at least his late 30s, adding several prominent wrinkles to his brow and deep crow's feet at the corners of his eyes. Potter sported a shaggy, dark blonde beard that ended in a small braid. To Draco's dismay, Clifton had also applied something to their eyes called contact lenses. Draco would have gladly gone his whole life without reliving that experience, but he had to admit they were effective. Potter's eyes now matched Snape's dark hue, while Draco's were a vivid blue. "Let's grab some lunch," Potter suggested, glancing at his watch. He said it'd take an hour or two to get through her hair. Draco agreed, and they headed to a nearby Indian restaurant that was a good 10 degrees too warm. As they settled in, Draco asked occasional questions about the paintings on the walls and the various machines the Muggles were using, and Potter answered him without laughing mostly. Today, Muggle London felt less overwhelming, but perhaps that was because Draco was so distracted. Every few seconds, even mid-conversation or mid-sentence, his thoughts drifted to Hermione, wondering what she was doing, what they had chosen to do together, what he had chosen. He recalled the taste of her lips, a mix of mild lip balm and something salty, and the way she had looked at him that morning, as if his presence made her happy, nervous, excited. Those feelings washed over him again and again, like an insistent tide. His mind hadn't fixated this way since. Well, since he had been consumed by thoughts of the vanishing cabinet every waking moment. But those thoughts had been filled with fear and panic. He hadn't known it was possible to be just as fixated on something that made him feel this way. He hadn't realized it was possible to feel like this at all. It wasn't the smug satisfaction he had felt in the days after he and Pansy had gotten together. When he thought about Hermione, when he thought of her melting into him in the dining room, the hesitance, and then the heat of the moment lingered in his mind, especially the way she'd angled him against the kitchen counter that morning. His heart stuttered, leaving him feeling disoriented as a rush of disbelief enveloped him, saturating everything around him with vibrant color. He was lost in thought. As it turned out, Clifton had underestimated the time it would take to tackle Hermione's hair. For hours later, he emerged, grinning sheepishly, with a transformed girl at his side. The most striking change was her hair, cascading over her shoulders as if Clifton had poured 2 bottles of Sleekeasies into it. But the rest of her face was equally bewildering. He had sculpted her jawline, accentuated her cheekbones, and given her an aquiline nose along with arched brows. With a touch of red paint on her lips, she exuded just the right amount of haughtiness. "Well," Clifton asked, "what do you think of the leading lady?" Hermione looked at Draco with laughing eyes, now a bright shade of green. He found himself smiling nervously, a compulsive grin reminiscent of the uneven smile he'd caught in the mirror last night while washing his face. He'd tried to shake it off, to repress it, but it was something he couldn't control. Potter let out a laugh. "It's brilliant, Leo. Take care of that wig, Stan," Clifton called after them as they left. Before long, it was 4:30, and they stood before the peacock blue door painted on a brick wall, the entrance to Circe and Cleodna. Draco had heard plenty about the place, but had never actually stepped inside. He walked straight through the wall, unfazed by the passing muggles, and entered the bar. The lounge was long and dark, with a low ceiling, its elegant walnut counter adorned with brass trimmings. The only light came from blue and indigo lamps, casting a ghostly glow on the few patrons inside. Glowing glass shelves hovered behind the bar, displaying liquor bottles in a dazzling array of colors, while booths lined the walls, separated by rich velvet curtains for privacy. Hermione, who had entered before Draco and Harry, was already seated at the end of the bar. Draco tried and failed to tear his gaze away from her. She was playfully toying with her hair, fascinated by its new texture. The sultry blue light glinted off the curve of her neck, and his fingertips tingled with the memory of running his hand through her hair. That familiar disbelief washed over him again, making him feel as if he were hovering just above the polished black oak floor. Potter ordered drinks, and they settled into a booth in the back corner, which provided a perfect vantage point of the rest of the bar. Half an hour later, the door swung open, letting in a shaft of light that illuminated the space as 5, then 10, then 20 people in ministry uniforms burst in, laughing and chatting animatedly. Draco spotted him almost immediately, Marcus Flint, blunt-jawed and towering over the crowd, his hair perfectly flat-topped like a well-manicured hedge. He was engaged in conversation with a witch sporting dark red curls. "There," Draco muttered across the table to Potter. "Now." Potter slid out of their booth and maneuvered through the crowd, murmuring apologies as he passed by. As Potter brushed past Flint, Draco noticed him discreetly grasping his wand, subtly turning it toward Flint, who paused, momentarily dazed. Draco grimaced into his gilly water and lime, hoping Potter hadn't pushed it too far. The Confundus charm was a delicate spell, capable of planting ideas or temporarily blanking a mind. It was easy to overdo it, and the last thing they needed was for Flint's associates to wonder why he suddenly appeared to be drooling onto the table. After a moment, however, Flint seemed to shake off the haze. He joined the other ministry workers in their booth, but his gaze was now fixed on Hermione. Her hand rested delicately on the stem of a glass filled with lavender liquid, which shimmered as it caught the light. Spat violet sparks. The fire whiskey and Madagascan glass apple were tempting. Not even 10 minutes later, Flint made his move, approaching Hermione. Draco tried to look away, to focus on the small talk Harry was sharing across the table. But his gaze kept drifting. He caught the soft, breathy tone in Hermione's voice, and before long, Flint had settled next to her, his eyes glued to her. Draco couldn't help but notice Flint's muscular build and how he towered over him. He also observed that Hermione's body leaned ever so slightly toward Flint. A sharp, unexpected stab of jealousy pierced through him. Frowning down at his gilly water and lime, he was taken aback. He had never been the jealous type. Pansy had flirted with other boys, especially Blaze, trying to provoke his jealousy, but he had always felt secure in her affections. It had felt like a game between them. But Hermione, she had loathed him for 6 long years. The improbability of it all hit him hard, even making him feel vulnerable. The last person she had cared for was Ron Weasley, for Merlin's sake. The very things that once filled him with confidence, his family, his status, his wealth, had crumbled away. Now he felt alone, adrift, and supposedly dead. What did he even have to offer anymore? Frustration began to bubble up, mingling with embarrassment. He caught a glimpse of his unfamiliar reflection in the dark glass table, looking utterly ridiculous in his disguise, like a 40-year-old sea captain. He longed to be himself, and he wanted Hermione to be herself too. He wished to envision a world where he could walk up to Flint right now and say, "I think you're sitting in my seat." With a sigh, he squeezed the lime wedge into the remnants of his drink. Gillywater hissed, spat, and swirled in the glass like a miniature storm. After what felt like an eternity, Hermione threw her head back and let out a cool laugh, Draco's cue. With a sense of relief washing over him, he stood up and approached the bar, empty glasses in hand. He slid them onto the polished walnut surface and discreetly gripped his wand. With a flick, he sent a Confundus charm toward Flint's broad back, then leaned against the bar, listening intently. "You know," Flint said, "the ministry's holding an event next month. I think I'd like it if you came. From the bathroom, Hermione called out. I got some useful information out of him. They were back at headquarters, and Draco was sitting with Potter in the front room of the cottage, their faces still raw from peeling off the false beards. They were brewing murtlap essence in a small cauldron to soothe their irritated skin. What kind of information? Draco asked, curiosity piqued. The restrictions on Diagon Alley have been lifted, for one thing. They think they've registered a critical mass of the population now, she replied. That's great, Potter exclaimed, levitating the murtlap out of the cauldron and into 2 small bowls. You can visit Madame Malkin's for dress robes anytime. No need to worry about nicking someone's papers, and that's one less visit to Leo we have to pay for. He grimaced. Maybe we won't bankrupt your parents after all. Exactly, Hermione said, emerging from the bathroom with a fresh-faced glow, her hands filled with the bits of rubber that had, until recently, been her disguise. With her face back to normal and her hair styled, she looked almost exactly as Draco remembered her from the old ball. And thank goodness for that, she continued, plopping down on the sofa, because Flint's asked me to dinner at a restaurant in Diagon Alley next Friday. Where? Draco asked, his interest piqued. It's called Arialo. I'd never heard of it, but... Before she could finish, Draco accidentally spilled some of the murtlap essence on the floor. The rug. Arialo? Yes, why? Is it nice? You could say that, Draco muttered, flicking his wand to vanish the spill. He tried to push away the image of Flint and Hermione leaning across a table in a candlelit corner. My parents got engaged there. It's the most expensive restaurant in Diagon Alley. Flint must know someone on staff. You usually have to book 2 months in advance. Well done, Hermione, Harry said, looking genuinely impressed. He must really fancy you already. She blew a strand of hair out of her face. It wasn't exactly difficult. I just agreed with him about everything and acted like I'd never been more interested in anything than the flying formations of the Vimborn Wasps in 1985. I didn't even use 5% of what I'd prepared for my cover story. Draco continued applying the murtlap to his cheek, feeling oddly relieved that Marcus Flint hadn't suddenly transformed into a brilliant conversationalist. They spent an hour discussing the possibilities of the dinner until the redness faded from Draco's and Harry's faces. When Potter finally went to bed, a brief silence settled over the room. Draco stole a furtive glance at Hermione from his armchair. The kiss they'd shared in the kitchen that morning felt like a distant memory. He couldn't shake the image of her leaning toward Flint. She thinks he's boring, he reminded himself. She was just acting. I liked the drink, Hermione offered, breaking the silence. The glass apple? Yeah. Maybe you really are the woman of Marcus Flint's dreams. He hoped she would grimace or say, God, I hope not. Instead, she laughed and replied, well, at least he's not so mean-looking anymore. He used to have that scowl all the time, but when he's not looking at you like he wants to wring your neck, it's not so bad. Draco didn't know how to respond. He felt stiff and uncomfortable. Did Hermione expect him to agree? Why? Was she really talking about the perks of spending an evening flirting with Marcus Flint? Oh, really? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Shall we start planning your engagement? Hermione turned to him, surprise flickering across her face, quickly replaced by disbelief. Draco, she said. What? Are you? She laughed, the sound light and teasing. Are you jealous? No. Even to his own ears, the denial sounded unconvincing. Hermione looked a bit bewildered, yet pleased. We need him to get to the Horcrux. That's the only point of this. I know that, he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. It's just, he can buy you a drink. Hermione's amusement faded, giving way to contemplation. I like the bar, she said after a moment. I kept thinking. Well, it would be a nice place to go. She twirled a lock of her hair around her finger. You know, together. If after, or if none of this were, she paused, shaking her head slightly. I'm being silly. No, he interjected immediately. No, I thought that too. That's what I meant. Hermione smiled, her warmth steadying his nerves. The atmosphere was nearly what I was picturing yesterday, she said, her voice softening. In the dining room, Draco propped one elbow on the arm of his chair, resting his chin in the palm of his hand. Really? He said, a lazy smile creeping onto his lips. And here I thought that was supposed to be for preparation, not imagination. She smiled back at him. It was. Apparently, we're just not very good at following clear directives. Speak for yourself, Granger. I'm great at following directives. Oh, are you really? Yeah. Hermione let one hand fall onto the sofa cushion beside her. Then sit here. Her tone might have sounded bossy in any other circumstance, but there was a slight hesitation that softened the command. Draco found himself obeying without a second thought. He rose and moved closer, acutely aware of how her eyes followed him. He settled onto the sofa next to her, close enough that as their thighs brushed together, Draco looked at her and said, And stay there, she replied, leaning toward him like a sapling swaying in the wind. He expected her to kiss him, but instead, her head sank against his shoulder as she curled up against his side. That familiar flutter returned in Draco's chest. He couldn't help but marvel at how perfectly she fit against him, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. She was warm, her nose still pink from where the prosthetic had peeled off. Hesitantly at first, Draco's hand settled on her shoulder, but soon it felt more secure. His thumb brushed gentle circles over her shoulder and down to her upper arm. "These are pretty easy directives," he said, breaking the momentary silence. "True," she replied, her eyes closing. "I suppose I'm just tired of things being hard." "Yeah," Draco agreed. "Me too." As November came to a close, the season's first flurry of snow began to fall, bringing a sense of optimism for their plan. Hermione went to dinner with Marcus Flint, which turned out to be deeply boring but technically successful. Meanwhile, Draco and Harry were both hired by Lizzie Spisworth, a tiny, excitable woman who couldn't stop raving about their anti-spilling spells. "So proficient," she exclaimed. "It's as if you've spent your days doing nothing else." Which, for the week leading up to their interviews, had been quite accurate. Still, Hermione felt a nagging sense of nervousness. She worried that Harry might let something slip about her and Draco. There was also the lingering fear that Ron might suddenly reappear, right when everything felt most precarious. Guilt over Ron still lingered at the back of her mind, but mostly she was consumed by a quiet, disbelieving giddiness that she wished she could bottle and savor. It bubbled up inside her, sometimes making her want to laugh out loud. Draco Malfoy was the one who stirred these feelings within her, the one who turned to her the moment she entered a room, wearing that breathless, alert expression. He engaged with her as she rattled off ideas about chained charms, and with just a brush of his hand against her thigh during dinner, he made her heart race. They spent late nights in the front room, talking about international wizarding affairs and sharing dreams of adventure, lost in each other's company and the possibilities that lay ahead. Politics, both wizarding and muggle. At first, he mostly listened to the latter. But soon enough, he began asking questions, and eventually he started making comments about how certain cities sounded intriguing or reminded him of places in the wizarding world. He inquired about her family, wanting to know about every obscure cousin, their jobs, their lives, and their children. In turn, she shared vivid details of her childhood. By 1 a.m, they would find themselves curled up together on the sofa in the library, kissing passionately, each craving the closeness. Hermione grew familiar with the look Draco wore after they'd shared a long kiss, a glimmer in his eyes that reflected a sense of satisfaction, yet left him yearning for more. Every little gesture from her prompted a reaction from him. When she brushed her hand against his waist, he would mirror her movement, tracing his thumb over her hip. When she smiled into a kiss, he would gently cup the back of her neck, drawing her nearer. He noticed everything about her. His attentiveness was both studious and intuitive, making Hermione feel as though she had stepped into the spotlight for the very first time. Though she tried to maintain some self-control, it proved challenging. He would subtly brush his hand against her shoulder or her hand when Harry wasn't looking. When they found themselves alone, he would place slow, lingering kisses on the side of her neck, leaving her skin tingling long after he had gone. During the day, they concocted silly excuses to sneak away into side rooms or outside, where their breaths mingled in the chilly air as they kissed. She would stand on tiptoe to press her lips against him beside the cottage, brushing specks of whitewash from his hair. There was something about the way he smiled at times, a smile she had never seen on his face before, one that seemed to slip completely out of his control. It usually happened during their playful banter when he would lose his composure, giving him an air that made him appear a bit older, perhaps. At 10:45 p.m. on December 1st, they prepared to apparate to Lillimont Lake. Harry had been buzzing with excitement about it all day, wondering how many members of the Order would show up and whether the person who had sent the silver dough would reveal themselves. It was 11 when they stepped out of the darkness and into the biting cold. A lone silhouette stood at the edge of the lake. The moment they emerged, it turned, wand at the ready. There was a sharp intake of breath. Then, with a trembling hand, Minerva McGonagall pulled back the hood of her cloak. She looked pale, clearly in shock. "Professor McGonagall," Harry exclaimed. As they rushed to her side, Hermione's heart raced. It felt surreal to see the Transfiguration professor here in the middle of the woods, especially since they hadn't encountered a single member of the Order for months. "Potter," McGonagall whispered, then turned her gaze to Hermione. "Granger?" She flinched when Draco stepped out from under the invisibility cloak, staring at him with evident disbelief. "Mr. Malfoy, I don't. Is anyone else coming?" Harry asked eagerly. Professor McGonagall regained her composure. "I received a message detailing the time and place of this meeting, Potter. It wasn't you who sent it." "A message?" Hermione frowned. "Isn't the mail at Hogwarts being monitored?" "It didn't come by Owl Miss Granger. It was sent by flew directly into my office." "That makes sense," Harry said, exchanging an excited glance with Hermione. "Professor, we believe someone at the Ministry has been secretly helping us, which would explain how they accessed an unmonitored flu line. They have a doe Patronus, that's all we know. Can you think of anyone it might be?" McGonagall's lips thinned as she considered the question. "I'm afraid not, Potter. Are you certain it was a doe? Not a goat, perhaps?" "Definitely not a goat," Harry replied, disappointment creeping into his voice. "Well, keep an eye out," she instructed. "Of course. But where have you been, Mr. Potter?" "The entire country. Here," Harry said, pressing A slip of parchment landed in her hand, bearing Ron's handwriting. "Read this," Harry urged. She quickly scanned the note and let out a short, surprised breath. "Hermione cast a Fidelius charm," Harry said proudly, taking the parchment back. "But what have the three of you been up to? Where is Mr. Weasley?" She gestured sharply toward the parchment. "I know his handwriting after 6 years of his essays." "He was with us," Hermione replied softly. "You're right, he's the secret keeper. But," a lump formed in her throat, "we haven't seen him in a month and a half. You don't know if he's at the Burrow, do you?" McGonagall's expression tightened with concern. "I'm afraid I have no idea." There was a pause before Harry spoke again. "As for what we've been doing, we've been working on something important, something Professor Dumbledore asked us to do." McGonagall's eyes widened. "Albus left you a mission, Potter?" He nodded. "And you require assistance? That's why you called this meeting." "Well, no," Harry admitted. "Not exactly. But we need to know everything that's been happening. We haven't been able to reach anyone. We've been stealing papers, but what's going on with the rest of the Order? What's happening at Hogwarts? Is everyone all right?" Hermione noticed the keen look in Harry's eyes and knew he was thinking of Ginny. She quickly cast Muffliato, while McGonagall performed several warming charms. They settled onto boulders near the edge of Lake Lillimont to talk and wait, just in case anyone else showed up. "Do you think the Weasleys might come?" Harry asked hopefully, glancing around the lake. "I would very much doubt it," McGonagall sighed. "My own knowledge is limited, Potter, as the world outside Hogwarts has been effectively cut off from the world within. But the Carrows have made threats against Ginny Weasley, suggesting that the family is in danger. The area is under constant surveillance. An apparition from the Burrow in the middle of the night would raise too many eyebrows, enough to warrant interrogation. Hagrid mentioned he received a similar message, but since he can't apparate, we decided it was too risky to have both of us away from the school, especially with our new headmaster keeping a close eye on things." Disgust tinged her voice. "What's Snape doing?" Draco asked, finally addressing McGonagall. She turned her piercing gaze on him, and Hermione could see him stiffen under her scrutiny, defenses rising like a feral animal sensing a predator. "He is transforming Hogwarts to suit the desires of his master," she finally replied. "We teachers still stand in opposition to the regime. As best as we can, we try to circumvent Snape, Filch, and the Carrows. They've started using corporal punishment and outright torture for students who show disloyalty to you-know-who." Her thin brows knitted together, though a glint of satisfaction sparkled in her eyes. "They've even attempted to recruit students to do their dirty work. However, to my surprise, I must admit, even students from their own house have made that particular tactic challenging." Hermione glanced at Draco and noticed the worry etched on his face. "Professor," Hermione began, "back in September, when we were, pursuing this mission of ours, Draco and I found ourselves at the Ministry." She recounted their narrow escape, disguised as the Parkinsons. Professor McGonagall listened intently, her hands clasped tightly over her knees, and by the end of Hermione's tale, her knuckles had turned white. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, we all heard about that. It caused quite a stir at Hogwarts, although the students naturally assumed that Mr. Potter was your partner in crime. She let out a heavy sigh. I'm sorry to bring you this news, Ms. Granger, Mr. Malfoy. Parkinson's parents were taken in for questioning about the incident. They've been in Azkaban ever since. Hermione felt her heart sink. Draco went stiff as a statue on the boulder beside her. She longed to reach out, to take his hand and squeeze it tightly. Instead, she whispered the question she knew he couldn't bring himself to ask. And Pansy? What about her brothers? As far as I understand, her brothers were placed in the care of a great-uncle, Ms. Parkinson herself. To Hermione's surprise, a hint of approval crept into Professor McGonagall's usually steely voice. Ms. Parkinson has become unruly. Unruly? Harry echoed, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. Yes, the supposed deaths of the Malfoys, coupled with her parents' imprisonment under Death Eater orders, have taken a toll on her. I believe she told the Carrows, if I recall correctly, that she would perform the Cruciatus on their instructions when the Dark Lord flapped into Hogwarts and made her. A choked sound escaped Hermione, a mix of laughter and incredulity. Harry's mouth hung open in shock, but Draco remained motionless, his face a mask of distress. McGonagall observed him with hawk-like intensity. Your friend, Mr. Goyle, she continued, refused to discipline Ms. Parkinson, which resulted in a significant punishment for both of them. I kept them back after their next transfiguration lesson to offer advice on coping with the aftereffects, and to reassure them that I, along with the other teachers, stand behind them. At last, Draco found his voice. Stood behind them? He asked, his tone hoarse. Stood behind. Can't you do anything else? You can't stop the Carrows? McGonagall regarded him with a look of pity. Mr. Malfoy, if a teacher contradicted you-know-whose servants, what do you think would happen? Would you prefer to have Fenrir Greyback or Bellatrix Lestrange teaching your friend's transfiguration? I refuse to be removed from Hogwarts. But I have told Ms. Parkinson and Mr. Goyle, if you feel the need to express your insubordination, let it be in my class instead. Hermione stared at Professor McGonagall, who sat as rigid as ever on the boulder, her bun pulled back tightly. The idea of Minerva McGonagall inviting Slytherins to act out in her classroom was as bewildering as anything they had heard in months. McGonagall paused, her gaze fixed intently on Draco. I've since learned from Madame Pomfrey that several younger Slytherins have begun to follow your friend's lead. Some, of course, have aligned themselves with the Dark Lord's wishes. Others, well. She adjusted her spectacles. Slytherin House appears to be facing deep divisions within itself, Mr. Malfoy. This is a time to discover where our loyalties truly lie. She emphasized the last sentence, and Draco looked away, discomfort flickering across his features. Hermione frowned, puzzled. What could he possibly be uncomfortable about? Pansy had stood up to the Carrows, yet Draco had done so much more in their quest for the Horcruxes. And now, he wasn't even taking credit for his contributions? This wasn't like him at all. With determination, she spoke up. We couldn't have come this far without Draco's help. Professor McGonagall turned her surprised gaze toward Hermione. Draco has been instrumental in our efforts regarding what Dumbledore left us to do, Professor, Hermione insisted. I would have perished in the ministry if he hadn't been there. His loyalties are with us. With me, she thought, feeling a surge of conviction. For the first time, McGonagall's expression seemed to soften. Well, I'm certainly glad to hear that, Mr. Malfoy. Draco's gray eyes flicked up to meet hers, and he nodded once, still silent. Professor McGonagall glanced at her silver wristwatch. I must return to the school, she said, rising from her seat. Right now, I'm supposed to be having a nightcap at the Hog's Head, McGonagall explained, a hint of bemusement in her voice. Aberforth is covering for me, but I should still. Aberforth? Harry interrupted, his surprise evident. Aberforth Dumbledore? Yes, she replied, raising an eyebrow. Why? He lives in Hogsmeade? He's in touch with the Order? Harry pressed, his curiosity growing. The barman, Hermione exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. I knew he looked related to Dumbledore when we were there for the funeral. Harry was now on his feet, a realization dawning on him. That's who's been in the mirror, he murmured, gazing out at the lake. The others stared at him, confusion written on their faces. He turned back to them, his eyes sharpening with focus. I have a fragment of a two-way mirror, he explained. Sirius gave it to me, and I could have sworn I saw Dumbledore's eye in it over the summer. It must have been Aberforth. He must have the other piece. That means we can communicate with him." Instead of sharing in his excitement, McGonagall regarded Harry with a touch of sadness. "I'm afraid there isn't much to communicate, Potter. The order is scattered. Hestia Jones and Daedalus Diggle disappeared shortly after checking in on your aunt, uncle, and cousin. We haven't heard from Kingsley, Remus, or Tonks, and if the Weasleys take any action against them—" She shook her head, a frown forming. "No," Harry insisted fiercely. "It's not over, Professor. We're here, aren't we? We have a new headquarters. You can get word to Hagrid and Aberforth. We can start pulling together again." He held up a piece of paper. "If anything happens and you're in danger, apparate to the cottage, all right? If you hear anything new about you-know-who or the Death Eaters' movements, come and find us. And when you can sneak Hagrid out, come and find you," Professor McGonagall said, a hint of affection in her voice. "I understand the idea, Potter." For a moment, McGonagall regarded Harry with a wistful pride. "It's been years since I've seen that address," she finally said. James and Lily would have been proud. Hermione felt her eyes well up with tears. She expected Harry to appear bashful or shaken, but he didn't. Instead, there was a steely resolve etched on his face. In that moment, Hermione realized she was witnessing a transformation. The boy she had met on the Hogwarts Express in their first year seemed to have evolved into someone much stronger. "I know," Harry replied quietly. Later that night, as they sat in front of the dying embers of the fire, Hermione turned to Draco, who was absent-mindedly tangling his fingers in her curls. "What was that?" she asked, recalling McGonagall's words about his loyalties. Draco's hand stilled. "What do you mean?" She shot him a wry, unimpressed look. "You know exactly what I mean. Since when have you not been the first to defend yourself?" Draco offered a half-smile, but couldn't come up with a satisfactory answer. The truth was, he couldn't pinpoint why he had chosen to remain silent. Perhaps he felt he couldn't mount a convincing defense. If he listed the ways he had defied the Dark Lord since summer, someone could easily counter with a list of all the things he had done the previous year. Or maybe it was his newfound inability to escape the memories of his past actions, those things he had done at Hogwarts and in his childhood. This reflection had become more frequent over the past week as he settled deeper into this new world. A world where he made small talk with Leo Clifton and exchanged awkward pleasantries with muggles at shop registers, where he asked questions about Hermione's family, and where Bella's voice grew more distant each day. When he wasn't lost in thoughts of Hermione and the rush of their kisses, he found himself imagining that tiny 11-year-old version of himself, wandering the halls and whispering to Crabbe and Goyle about blood traders and muggle lovers, speaking as if he had any real understanding of the world. He knew that when McGonagall looked at him, she still saw that child he once was. Perhaps, in that moment by the lake, he hadn't wanted to defend that child. But then again, maybe he felt he didn't need her understanding. What was her goodwill to him, after all? Was he really expected to bare his soul, just to earn the favor of someone whose opinion mattered little to him? As McGonagall's steely gaze locked onto his, searching, expectant, Draco found his thoughts drifting to Hermione instead. He recalled everything she knew about the dark year and the new realizations he had come to. A wave of relief washed over him at the thought that she understood him. There was nothing left to explain between them. When she had stood up for him, he had wanted nothing more than to take her hand right there in the moonlight. As the Ministry Gala approached, time seemed to speed up. Initially, it felt like it was ages away. They had 3 whole weeks, and Draco and Harry had brought home their gala uniforms, which Draco loathed. After all, they were as well-tailored as potato sacks. With so much time on their hands, they often got sidetracked during their planning, reminiscing about everything McGonagall had shared about Hogwarts. Then, with just 2 weeks left until the gala, Hermione had gone to Madame Malkin's to order her dress robes. She also visited the Scavengers Guild to buy new, discreet wands, and Flint had added her name to the guest list. Thoughts of the new, grim Hogwarts began to take a back seat in his mind. Instead, he found himself imagining the not-so-distant future when he would walk up the sweeping steps of the manor and feel at home again. Memories of his younger self began to resurface, and he felt as if he were being trailed by the ghosts of his past. One snowy night in mid-December, McGonagall apparated into the cottage's front room, startling them all with her sudden arrival. She informed them that she would be able to bring Hagrid to Lillimont Lake by side-along. During the Christmas holiday, Draco found himself drawn to the precious slip of paper with Weasley's words written on it. a small comfort that lifted Hermione and Harry's spirits immensely. That evening, Hermione reminisced with Draco about their third year, when she and Weasley had fought constantly. Hagrid, always a source of cheer and encouragement, had been there for her. In the back of his mind, Draco recalled lying in the hospital wing that year, exaggerating his injury from the hippogriff incident in an effort to get Hagrid fired. The memory made him uneasy, a sinking feeling settling deep within him, and he couldn't bring himself to meet Hermione's gaze. "What is it?" she asked gently, lifting his chin with her fingers. "Where do you keep going these days?" The fact that she noticed, that she understood him so well, stirred something within Draco. "I'm right here, Granger," he replied, wrapping his arm around her back and pulling her half onto his lap. "I have no idea what you're talking about." She leaned in and kissed him. "You'll tell me eventually," she said matter-of-factly, toying with his hair. He looked up into her face and admitted, "Yeah, probably." With the gala just a week away, Hermione returned from Diagon Alley with a bag from Madame Malkin's that she refused to let Draco peek into. The excitement left little room for anything else in their minds. Every waking hour was consumed with reviewing contingency plans for every potential mishap. Even during late-night hours together, they found it hard to discuss anything beyond the gala. Some nights, they didn't speak at all. They simply kissed with increasing urgency in front of the fire as the blue shadows of snow deepened outside, or in his room, laughing at the creaking mattress beneath them. In those quiet moments, he held her close, feeling a sense of panic spreading through him as he contemplated the dangers that lay ahead. Were they really going to go through with this? Plunge into the unknown. The room, Draco found himself lost in thought. How had they ended up here, diving headfirst into the Ministry, surrounded by Aurors, Death Eaters, and the entire Department of Magical Law Enforcement? Suddenly, it was the morning of December 23rd. Draco lifted his gaze from the armchair in the front room, still clad in his black Spizworth's uniform, and watched as Hermione descended the stairs in her dress robes. Despite having slept poorly the night before, all feelings of fatigue and anxiety vanished at the sight of her. She navigated the creaky steps with care, the crimson satin of her gown cascading elegantly to the floor, where it met her sparkling black shoes. These weren't the playful, juvenile dress robes they had all worn to the ball in their fourth year, resembling children playing dress-up in their parents' clothes. No, this gown was sophisticated, designed for a society event, sleeveless and graceful, complete with an asymmetrical capelet that she unlaced and let slide off her bare shoulders as she turned around the banister. Draco caught a glimpse of her back, the line of the robe dipping tantalizingly close to her waist, and suddenly his mouth felt as dry as parchment. He wished they had at least 6 more hours before they had to leave, just so he could admire her. The soft shimmering details at her hip, the sparse red thread embroidered onto the crimson fabric, the delicate twin streamers of fabric laced at her shoulders, the smooth skin at the divot of her collarbones. Hermione coaxed the volumes of her hair over one shoulder, a hesitant smile gracing her lips as she looked at Harry and Draco. "Do I look all right?" she asked. "I know he's going to change my face, but—" "It's great, Hermione," Harry replied, a genuine smile breaking through. "You really look the part." He glanced over at Draco, but whatever he saw on his face made him look away just as quickly. "It's almost time," he said, checking his watch. "I'll grab the new wands, and then we'll go see Leo. Sound good?" "Perfect," Hermione replied as Harry jogged up the steps, leaving Draco alone with his thoughts, captivated by the vision before him. In a heartbeat, Draco crossed the room, closing the distance between them in just a few swift strides. He pressed his lips to hers, and a delightful shiver coursed through her body, sending him spiraling into a dizzying bliss. His mind was ablaze with a rush of exhilaration, and his fingers glided over her waist, tracing the smooth curve of her back. Each touch ignited a thrill within him. All he could think about was Hermione, how her hair fell free from her fingertips, brushing against his face, and how she released the capelet from her grip to clutch at his robes, pulling him closer. But before they could savor the moment, the sound of Potter's footsteps echoed above them, drawing nearer. They broke apart, both of them breathing heavily. Draco felt an urge to speak, to tell her just how beautiful she looked, but words eluded him. As she gazed up into his eyes, another emotion surged through him, fear. He could see it mirrored in her expression. She was afraid too. In that instant, Draco questioned whether he was a coward. He had always prioritized himself and never considered it a flaw, never thought it signified weakness. Yet here he was, contemplating saying, "We don't have to go." The thought bewildered him. Hadn't he vowed months ago, while recovering after the ministry, to hunt the Horcruxes and reclaim his life. And yet, staring at Hermione, a spiraling sense of dread washed over him. The mere idea of her getting hurt loomed large, a terrifying reality. He realized he could be discovered, could be killed at any moment. Just as he was stepping into a new world he had only begun to navigate. But if they stayed at headquarters, he could change out of these ill-fitting robes, and they could recreate another night like Halloween. They could share laughter and conversations with Potter, pretending that the world wasn't crumbling around them. And later, when they were safe, they could. Alone, he could kiss her right there, on the delicate curve of her shoulder, just where her hair tumbled down. Draco thought he might have done it, hesitating, holding back, playing it safe. But deep down, he knew Hermione would never shy away. A painful lump formed in his throat as he bent down, picked up the capelet from the floor, and returned it to her hand before stepping back to a respectable distance, just as Harry Potter jogged back into view. Hermione tried to act as if nothing had happened, though a rosy glow colored her cheeks. As Draco watched her, explaining the plan to Harry for what felt like the 1000th time, he struggled to find his resolve. He recalled the Horcrux that shimmered around Dolores Umbridge's neck. 3 had already been destroyed. If they stayed here, he knew they would never find another. He remembered how Hermione had spoken to him while he lay in bed, his shoulder throbbing with pain, reminding him, "The cause is our lives." Thoughts of Cersei and Cleodna, of Arialo, and the parties on the lawn at Malfoy Manor filled his mind. He envisioned himself at Hermione's side in a world that was safe, but that image felt 1,000 miles away, like a photograph at the end of a long, dark hallway. When Hermione turned to him and asked, "Ready?" he realized she didn't believe the lie he offered. Standing at the manor gate, arm in arm with Marcus Flint, Hermione could hardly believe she was actually there. They had queued for a quarter of an hour, chatting about Flint's week at work while scores of ministry officials moved through the gates. Flint wore dark green dress robes with silver clasps. Occasionally, he glanced down at her dress robes, his gaze lingering uncomfortably on her chest, prompting her to adjust her capelet. She thought of Draco, the roughness of his hand against her back, and the urgency in his kiss at the cottage, like it was his last chance. Her palms felt clammy. She discreetly wiped her hands on her robes and stood up a little straighter. Everything, she reassured herself, was going to go according to plan. The sun had set hours earlier, and the wrought iron gates, wide open, were adorned with tiny golden lights. Malfoy Manor loomed at the end of a long, hedge-lined drive, perched atop a hill. The sight was undeniably beautiful, but a shroud of foreboding hung over the place, making it feel more imposing than inviting. "Marcus Flint," Flynn announced, handing his invitation to a uniformed security which at the gates. "And my guest, Marilee Linhart." The security which scanned a list that hovered in front of her. She was burly and stony-faced, with the letters GG emblazoned on the breast of her uniform. Her wand was holstered at her wrist, poised for action with just a flick. For other Greengrass guards stood at attention by the gates, stiff and immovable, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The new wand Hermione had purchased at the Scavengers Guild felt heavy in her pocket, her only means of protection. There was no room for hidden tricks here. The guards were thoroughly searching everything. Even now, they were opening 6 bottles of mulled mead to inspect their contents, despite the furious protests of a mustached wizard. After a brief examination, the security which returned Flint's invitation and nodded them through. Hermione didn't smile. Marilee Linhart showed neither affection nor warmth, only approval or disapproval. "This place is one of the oldest wizarding houses in the country," Flint said, taking her arm roughly, without hesitation. He spoke with bravado, as if he were the one who had built the manor. "You've been here before?" Hermione asked casually. "Yeah, I knew the family who lived here before the Lestranges." For the first time since they'd met, Flint's tone held a hint of reluctance. "They got mixed up in some, well, no one really knows the details." Hermione raised an eyebrow at him. "Friends of yours?" Flint fell silent, his expression unreadable. They walked in silence for a moment, the sound of gravel crunching beneath their feet. Soft golden lights illuminated the fluttering feathers of several albino peacocks that roamed gracefully along the hedges. "Yeah, we were friends," Flint said, his voice steady. "And they were loyal to the end, mind." He added this quickly, as if eager to clarify any misconceptions. They didn't turn blood traitor when things got complicated. But that was back when Dumbledore was still alive, so things were more dangerous then. No one could have known what might happen. Flint seemed to find his footing, nodding to himself as he repeated, "No one could have known." As they approached Malfoy Manor, its imposing presence loomed overhead. The facade, made of worn gray stone, was adorned with tall French windows, each pane rippled with age. Statues of dragons and chimeras decorated the eaves, appearing to gamble and play 40 feet above them, while the windows glowed with inviting light. Yet, Hermione's sense of foreboding only intensified. She struggled to resist the urge to grip her wand in her pocket. Thoughts of Draco and Harry flitted through her mind, how they had entered with Lizzie Spisworth just hours earlier, and now, hopefully, found refuge within the heart of the manor. She and Flint descended the long staircase, arriving in a marble foyer that sparkled with decorations. Real, never-melting icicles glimmered from the banisters, and fairies with delicate, gauzy wings fluttered over the lintels of the broad doorways. A towering Christmas tree reached toward the lowest point of an intricately molded chandelier, its branches almost brushing against it. It felt surreal to be in a place where Draco had grown up, a space that was not merely a museum or a preserved historical site, but the very backdrop of his childhood, where he had played with friends and learned to navigate the world. She made an effort to appear neither interested nor impressed. "You'll have to tell me who all these people are, Marcus," she said, adopting Mary Lee's low, breathy tones as she glanced around. It was a relief that she'd recognized the need for subtlety. So far, Hermione had only seen a parade of unfamiliar faces, ranging from early adulthood to middle age. However, her gaze landed on Rita Skeeter, who was leaning against a nearby table, sipping a blood-red drink. A photographer stood at her side, and a quick quotes quill danced across a notepad before her. Flint puffed out his barrel chest with importance as he scanned the crowd. "Those are the Green Grasses," he said, pointing to a couple in their 40s. "They own the security company, and that's Algernon Wolflaw from the Office of Domestic Affairs. He's only a half-blood, but well-liked. He had a hand in planning all this." He then nodded toward a young couple, two red-haired women in dress robes, one in black and deep purple, the other in gray and misty white. Lowering his voice, he added, "Lydia Taylor and May Derisa from the Department of International Magical Cooperation. There's some funny business with their family trees, but they somehow wheedled their way out of supervision." "Charming," Hermione replied, contemplating whether she should approach Taylor or Derisa. They might prove to be useful contacts if she ever needed papers forged. But Flint was already moving forward, his large hand gripping her waist a bit too tightly. "I'll introduce you to some others in magical games and sports inside. Come on." Hermione allowed herself to be guided as they followed the stream of guests across the foyer and into what resembled a ballroom. Crisscrossing hardwood floors stretched 50 feet to a small stage where a band was arranging a collection of eccentric-looking instruments, each adorned with more strings, pegs, and curlicued shapes than any Muggle instrument would have. The ceiling soared overhead, and along one wall, a low fire simmered in a hearth large enough to fit a small bus. Above the hearth hung a banner that sparkled with green and red letters. First Annual Ministry of Magic Christmas Gala for the Celebration of Magical Unity. On the opposite wall, a matching banner proclaimed, "Magic is might." Hermione's usually composed expression must have slipped, because Flint noticed and he was grinning down at her. "What do you think?" She offered a small, knowing smile in response. "It's not quite the scale we manage in Dubai, but I've seen worse." "Never impressed, are you? I like that in a witch." Flint's hand slid from her waist to her lower back, then dipped dangerously low. "Would you care to find me a drink?" she said, stepping forward to distance herself from his touch. For a moment, he looked displeased, but then he nodded and moved off into the growing crowd, leaving Hermione at a small table tucked in the corner. She let out a slow breath, scanning the room for Draco, Harry, Umbridge, or the Weasleys. Their first task was clear: find Mr. and Mrs. Weasley to share the address of headquarters. They were certain the Weasleys wouldn't linger at the gala for long, but it was unlikely they would skip it altogether, especially when appearing to have assimilated into this new society was so crucial. Hermione had tucked the piece of parchment with the information into her bra. It itched every time she moved. Suddenly, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Hermione followed the gazes of everyone in the room, all directing their attention back toward the grand entryway. A chill washed over her. She had known they would be here, she and her husband. This was their manor now. Yet the sight of Bellatrix Lestrange, heavy-lidded and imperious, sweeping through the door alongside her husband Rodolphus, made Hermione freeze. She recalled Bellatrix in the Department of Mysteries, lashing out with her wand, her spells bursting forth with such frenzied power that they had splintered layers of wood and glass. On Bellatrix's other side stood Yaxley, who, unless Hermione was mistaken, looked thinner than he had at the ministry. He also appeared to be limping. Hermione couldn't help but wonder how he and Crabbe had been punished for the events at the ministry, and just as that thought crossed her mind, Crabbe entered the room. The threshold loomed large and imposing, and yet, even as he stood there, his face appeared drawn and his gait unsteady. Hermione's breath caught in her throat as she noticed who was with him. Vincent Crabbe strolled alongside his father, with Millicent Bulstrode at his side, clad in pale green dress robes. A defiant expression twisted Crabbe's blunt features, as if he dared anyone to question his father's condition. Hermione knew she was nearly unrecognizable, yet as the rest of the group filed in, she instinctively pressed further into the shadows. Faces she recognized began to fill the room, each one a potential threat. There was Garton Goyle, his pale face pockmarked, muttering irritably to his son Gregory. An ethereally beautiful woman with obsidian-dark skin ushered Blaise Zabini along, who looked more proud and disgusted than ever. Then there was Theodore Knott, short and slender with sandy hair, standing next to an older brother in trainee aura robes. Pansy Parkinson clung to Theo's arm, and Hermione couldn't help but notice, with a mix of fascination and horror, the fine cuts that crisscrossed Pansy's cheek, remnants of an earlier struggle. As the Slytherins dispersed into the room, greeted by enthusiastic shouts from ministry members, a voice from a nearby table broke the tension. "Let's all clap for our ruling class," it muttered, dripping with sarcasm. Hermione glanced over, her heart racing as she recognized the two people at the table beside her. One was a plump, black-haired which she didn't know, but the other was unmistakable, Sturgis Podmore, broad-shouldered with a thatch of blonde hair. He had gone to Azkaban during their 5th year after falling victim to the imperious curse cast by the Death Eaters. She recalled studying his photo in the Daily Prophet. After his release, he had distanced himself from the Order to recuperate, but surely he still held sympathy for their cause. And hadn't the witch? What if the person accompanying him just insulted the Death Eaters? What if Sturgis had been in contact with other members of the Order? Should she say something? The witch's dark eyes flickered over to Hermione, a wary glint revealing her concern that Hermione might have overheard the comment. Quickly, Hermione looked away, not wanting to reveal her awareness. Just as she was debating whether to engage with them, Flint returned, carrying 2 glasses of pale blue wine. "Twilight-infused Sauvignon," he said, placing Hermione's glass in front of her. He hesitated, his gaze shifting to Podmore and the witch. "Ah, Podmore, right?" Flint grunted, sounding somewhat suspicious, but not entirely unfriendly. "Obliviation squads?" Podmore nodded once. "Flint, I believe," he said, extending his hand. They shook briefly. "And this is my girlfriend, Nora Pruitt." Hermione opened her mouth to introduce herself, but Flint jumped in. "This is Marilee Linhart." Podmore and Pruitt both extended their hands, and Hermione shook them, wondering if there was a way she could communicate with Podmore, some kind of code to indicate her loyalties or to question his. "Marilee went to school in Dubai," Flint continued. "Tell them about the MWA, Marilee. We're all Hogwarts here." Yes," Hermione said, her heart racing. Well, from what I've read about Hogwarts, the schools are quite different. We don't have a house system at all, and we've only been coeducational more recently. It was a witches-only academy until the 1980s. She kept talking, but her voice faltered. Marilee's breathy tones were slipping away, and she felt herself reverting to the role of a teacher, rattling off facts from the front of a classroom. It was as if she had lost her grip on her character, struggling to make a decision about Podmore in that moment. Fortunately, Flint didn't seem to be paying attention at all. He was scanning the room. In the room, his gaze lingered with interest on some of the Slytherins who had arrived while he was away. But when Hermione met the witch's eyes, her voice faltered. The woman was staring unblinkingly at her, a cocktail glass poised just millimeters from her lips. This stranger recognized Hermione's voice. How? The realization struck her like a thunderbolt. The woman standing before her wasn't Nora Pruitt at all, it was Tonks. Podmore had picked up on the tension. His hazel eyes darted from Hermione to Tonks. "Flint," he said suddenly. Flint turned to them. "What?" "Crabbe was trying to flag you down," Podmore pointed out, gesturing toward the far end of the ballroom, where both the elder and younger Crabbes were deep in conversation with Zabini. Flint looked momentarily unsettled. Hermione could tell he was aware of the elder Crabbe's reputation as a Death Eater. He glanced down at Hermione. I'll speak with him alone, Marilee." "Of course," Hermione replied. I'll wait for you here." The moment Flint melted into the crowd, Hermione, Podmore, and Tonks huddled together. "Watch her, Hermione," Tonks whispered, her face a mix of disbelief and relief. "Hermione Granger?" Podmore's large brown eyes were filled with concern. "How in Merlin's name did you get in?" "Never mind that now," Hermione urged. "Tonks, you're safe. You're all right. How's Remus?" Her gaze fell to Tonks's stomach, which had a gentle curve, blending seamlessly with the rest of her full figure. Most people wouldn't have noticed her pregnancy. "Remus is fine," Tonks replied in a hushed tone. "We've been moving from place to place. Kingsley and we've been burning through sympathizers' houses before they can find us. We've been at Pods for a week now, getting ready for this. We're trying to find the Weasleys, to get organized again." Hermione turned toward the wall and discreetly slipped the parchment out from her dress robes, holding it up for both Podmore and Tonks. "Read this. Quickly," she whispered. Their eyes widened as they scanned the words. Tonks's unfamiliar face lit up with a bold, unmistakable excitement. "That's the ticket," she breathed. Hermione's gaze flickered to Flint, who was crossing the room with a deep scowl. "You can't tell anyone you saw me," she whispered urgently, tucking the parchment back into her robes. "I was never here, do you understand?" Podmore inhaled sharply, mouthing the name. "Potter?" Hermione glanced around, ensuring no one was watching or listening. She nodded. Podmore's hand flew to his mouth in shock, while Tonks's expression brightened. "We're here on order business," Hermione whispered, her tone intense. "Not a word. Do you understand?" They both nodded. As Flint approached their table, Hermione stepped back and shifted her voice to a low, breathy tone. "Well, it was lovely to meet your friends, Marcus." She shot a look of disdain at Tonks and Podmore. "But I'd love to meet some of your colleagues. Didn't you say the whole department would be here?" As he led her away, she passed a bald, bearded wizard holding a silver tray topped with tiny tartlets. It was Harry. Their eyes locked, and just as a guest swept a tartlet off the platter, ignoring Harry completely, he made their signal for everything to be on schedule, tapping his chin twice with a knuckle. "Weasleys?" She signaled, discreetly flashing 3 fingers. "Umbridge?" She indicated with a quick flick of her pinky. He shook his head. Hermione nodded, her heart aching with the desire to tell him about Tonks and Podmore, to reassure him that Remus was safe, that Kingsley was safe, and that 2 more allies would be able to visit headquarters. But for now, she couldn't break away from Flint. She knew she had to act quickly, or Flint might start to think she was avoiding him. As he introduced her to colleague after colleague from the Department of Magical Games and Sports, her heart rate gradually settled. The band struck up a lively tune, and for about half an hour, Hermione finally had the chance to showcase the Quidditch knowledge she had diligently studied. She kept pace with the conversation about the Quidditch World Cup of 1974 in Syria. The mostly male department members shot her surprised and admiring glances, while Flint offered subtle thumps of congratulations, which only served to irritate her. No, she didn't genuinely care about Quidditch, but it wasn't as if female Quidditch fans were a rarity. Still, she tried to remain detached. They were situated in a corner by the hearth, allowing her to keep an eye on the door. At precisely 9 p.m., Molly and Arthur Weasley appeared in the threshold, looking shabby and out of place. Many gala attendees paused, curling their lips in disdain or shuffling away, clearly apprehensive about getting too close to them. Mr. Weasley wore a resigned expression, while Mrs. Weasley's round face remained stoic. "Excuse me, Marcus," Hermione said, interrupting Flint. "I need to find a bathroom." She navigated across the room, determined to intercept the Weasleys before they could merge into the crowd. Just 6 paces into the ballroom, she reached them and feigned a small, unobtrusive stumble, spilling her Twilight Sauvignon onto Mrs. Weasley's robes. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," Hermione exclaimed, catching her balance by holding onto both Weasley's arms. She had practiced this maneuver for over an hour with Draco and Harry, and it worked flawlessly. Caught off guard, the Weasleys studied her, and she leaned in, speaking closely to their ears. "It's Hermione. Follow me." Both Weasleys gasped in surprise. To their credit, they quickly masked their shock, their expressions shifting to something resembling annoyance. "I feel dreadful," Hermione said a bit louder, pulling back to usher them toward the foyer. "Here, let me take care of that." Instead of just using her wand, Hermione grabbed a handful of napkins from a nearby table and gently dabbed them against Mrs. Weasley's shoulder. They passed another stern-looking member of the Greengrass Guard, and then made their way down a narrow side hall adorned with oil paintings and gilt frames. Signs indicated a bathroom up ahead. They paused in the middle of the hall. "No problem at all, dear Mrs. Weasley said, allowing Hermione to fuss over her as an older woman hurried out of the bathroom, rummaging through a large black bag. The moment the woman disappeared from sight and the hallway fell quiet, they slipped through a nearby door into a closet, dropping their pretense. "You mustn't be here, Mrs. Weasley whispered, her face suddenly pale and filled with fear. "What were you thinking? You have to leave now." "There's no time to argue," Hermione hissed, pulling a slip of parchment from her robes. "Read this." The Weasleys complied, and Mr. Weasley's expression turned serious as he glanced back at her. Like McGonagall, he had clearly recognized his son's handwriting. "Is Ron here too?" Hermione's stomach twisted. She had anticipated this question, told herself to be ready for it, but hearing the confirmation that Ron wasn't at the burrow sent a wave of panic through her. "He hasn't been with us for 2 months, she whispered. "He hasn't been to the burrow." Mrs. Weasley's kind face fell even further. She seemed at a loss for words, merely shaking her head. "Nor to Bill and Fleur's?" Hermione added, her voice tinged with desperation. "No, Mr. Weasley's chest heaved, his breathing uneven. "I visited Shell Cottage last week. It's where the family is supposed to meet if something goes wrong. Bill and Fleur are there alone." Hermione felt her own breaths growing shallow. She struggled to hold on to her purpose. She had to stay focused. Focus. She could worry about Ron later, once she was safe and had the Horcrux in hand. "St. Sturgis Podmore and Tonks are in the ballroom," she whispered, her lips feeling numb and clumsy. "They want to speak to you. We're all trying to regroup. Pack your things when you can and bring the whole family to headquarters, along with any tents you can find. You won't have to hide anymore. We can make a plan. I have to go." "Wait, Mr. Weasley said, catching her arm. "Is the Malfoy boy still with you?" The question broke through her fog of anxiety. "Yes, why?" "His mother found me outside the ministry. I know where they're staying." Draco felt as if he were trapped in a nightmare. Over the past few weeks, he had been haunted by dreams of home, though something always felt off, something about the angles or the colors. But now, as he moved through the halls from the east wing to the main rooms, everything seemed achingly familiar, just as he'd last seen it during the Easter holidays. It was disorienting, almost 1,000 times worse than the dreams. After missing his home for months, being back here was a kind of agony. All the remnants of his former life remained untouched, as if he hadn't vanished, as if he hadn't died, as if his absence meant nothing. He hadn't dared to venture down to the west end of the house, to his own room. The very thought was making him feel feverish. "You all right, mate?" asked a spotty woman a few years older than him, balancing a pair of hors d'oeuvres trays as they exited the kitchen. "Someone say something to you?" It was as good an excuse as any for his distraction, so Draco nodded. "The guests in these places are always the bloody worst, aren't they?" the woman said with a knowing wink. "Chin up. Lizzie always takes us out to the Leaky Cauldron the night after, her treat. We can down a liter of fire whiskey and swap stories about the biggest arseholes," she declared, striding confidently down the long green carpet that stretched across the manor's main hall. Draco followed closely behind, balancing a tray of clean glasses as he passed the sculpted bust of Colalia the Catastrophic and the expansive painting of the Battle of the Hebridean Blacks. As he reached the top of the staircase in the foyer, he gazed down at the smooth white marble floor, the shimmering chandelier, and the towering Christmas tree. By the time he reached the bottom of the steps, beads of sweat were forming on his brow. He had spent the evening in the kitchen, managing to steer clear of the room ahead. His family had always referred to it as the hearth room. "It won't look the same," he reassured himself. "They must have cleared all the furniture away." But that thought brought him no comfort. The emptiness would only serve to expose the floor. He could vividly recall the old carpet that used to line the hearth, the way it had felt against his cheek. His mind drifted back to the Muggle man who had been at the Dark Lord's wand tip, the way his body had jerked like a marionette, bare heels splayed against the polished parquet floor. The Dark Lord had sliced away his shirt, cutting lines into his skin, while the man screamed. Then he'd been turned upside down. And there was Draco, standing there, laughing, his voice merging with the chaos around him. An hour later, that man had been dead. It was in that very room where Draco had taken the mark. The pain had been excruciating, yet he had willingly embraced it, eager to erase the mistakes he believed his father had made. As the echoes of the gala drifted around him, he could almost hear his own voice. Everything he had hurled at the Death Eaters in these halls, all the insults he had flung at muggle-borns, half-bloods, and blood traitors. It was a desperate attempt to belong. Draco swayed at the bottom of the steps, his gaze drifting through the open doors into the night, where twin hedges glowed with tiny lights. There they were again, the ghosts that haunted him, ever present in the shadows. A spark ignited in his eyes. He could see his 11-year-old self racing down the gravel path, shouting at Crabbe and Goyle, "Hurry up, for Merlin's sake, you two are so slow." He recalled riding a toy broomstick over the balcony, zooming across the marble floor, and boasting to Pansy that she could never catch up. Then there was the memory of himself at 14, sulking as he slid down the banister, mocking Hermione in front of his mother, all to mask the resentment he felt for yet another time when a Muggle-born had outperformed him on every test. This place was his past. It represented everything he had ever been. Yet now he found himself separate from it, exposed to the quiet of a new world. If blood truly meant nothing, then all those years he had acted otherwise had been for naught. Every word, every thought, every action rendered meaningless. He recalled the moment in third year when, after slapping him, Hermione had called him foul and evil. Now he saw himself through her eyes, ridiculing the gamekeeper who had comforted her. He could picture himself in Madame Malkin's, turning to his mother and saying, barely more than a year ago, "If you're wondering what that smell is, Mother, a mudblood just walked in." A bitter taste rose in Draco's mouth, reminiscent of bile. Without thinking, he turned left, away from the gala's threshold, and headed for a side corridor. He approached a nearby door, but it was locked. Through gritted teeth, he muttered, "Alhamra," desperate for privacy, eager to slip out of sight. The door clicked open, revealing a dark, cold passage with a steep set of steps. He descended a few, whispering, "Lumos," and set down the tray of wine glasses. Leaning against the stone wall, he released a shaky breath. In recent months, he had become familiar with self-doubt, but this was something entirely different. It was a heavy, cloying self-loathing, coursing through his veins like molten lava. After learning to trust Hermione, to care for her, fearful, after the past few weeks, which had felt like an oasis of understanding amidst the chaos of the previous year, Draco hadn't anticipated the impact returning to this place would have on him. He found himself baffled by how she could look at him without still harboring loathing. How could she not see the myriad of flaws that now filled him with an overwhelming shame, a shame so intense it felt like panic? What was he supposed to do now that he viewed his past self through this new lens? He had changed his mind, altered his actions, yet he remained trapped within the same skin. There was no way to expunge his former self from his being. That was a reality he would never escape. Of course, McGonagall had looked at him with suspicion. For the rest of his life, he would be met with that same gaze. And why shouldn't they look at him that way? He thought bitterly. When had he ever looked at someone and forgiven them completely? Hadn't he clung to petty grudges, holding on to countless trivial judgments? Why should he be treated any differently? Why would anyone care if he had changed? Suddenly, a sound jolted him, nearly causing him to stumble down the stairs. "Hello!" The voice echoed from below, small and feeble. For a moment, Draco could only stare down the dark flight of steps, his heart racing. His thoughts froze, his mind a blank slate. Is someone there? It was a girl's voice. A wave of sick dread washed over him as he began to descend. Usually, this space housed extra furniture for their summer garden parties, a dark and forgotten corner of the house. But as he approached the foot of the stairs, he noticed a heavy door had been conjured into place, sealing off whatever lay beyond. His heart raced in his throat as he held his wand aloft, casting light into the shadows. A barred window in the door revealed a face staring back at him, grimy, starved-looking with wide, fearful eyes. Pale in the dim light was Luna Lovegood.